Good to see you.
All right, speaking of sanctions, sometimes they do work, despite all the critics who say, you know, sanctions just take a lot of time, and in the end, they don't do a lot of good. You might be taking a look at Russia these days, and its latest quarterly GDP report, that crashed 4.6%. Now, lower oil prices, a big reason, I grant you, but those sanctions that were doubled and tripled up, that had a big effect, too. They weren't in place a year earlier, so that represents something that former Thatcher advisor Nile Gardiner says is proof that perfectly and exquisitely targeted sanctions can do the trick. It is interesting, Niall. I mean, those sanctions kicked in, all of a sudden the Russian economy kicked out. What happened?
That's an excellent point, Neil. And the example of Russia shows that targeted economic sanctions can work, inflicting significant economic damage. And I think the broader lesson from the Russia example is that when you do apply sanctions regimes in a targeted way, they can work. And there's every reason why the sanctions against Iran should be kept in place. And there's every reason why the Iran deal, I think, is a huge disaster, frankly, for the United States and for Western interests in general. But what we have seen in Russia is a dictatorial regime headed by Vladimir Putin being hard hit by a whole raft of sanctions being applied by the United States and the European Union countries against a regime that has launched an invasion against Ukraine. And the Russians basically this is a nation in significant decline, partly as a result of Putin's leadership, but also as a result of the economic measures being taken against the country.
Do you think that sanctions are getting really tough on one country, especially one that contributes to the world GDP, as Russia does, to a lesser extent than China, certainly a lesser extent than us, comes back to zoom you, though? Because I'm looking at the markets as you and I are speaking, we're down 250 points. China's melting on fears that it can't contain itself. And now with this Russian thing, maybe another big oil energy player is in disarray, that this is feeding on itself. Be careful what you wish for. What do you say?
Well, that's an important point. I don't think the Russian economic situation has impacted Europe more broadly in terms of its economy. For example,
it is robbing some of those French and Belgian concerns of a market, right?
Yeah, I think there are some energy concerns with regard to countries such as Germany, France, heavily energy dependent upon Russia. But if you look at Russia's near neighbours in Eastern Europe, countries that used to be ruled by the iron fist of the Soviet Union, they're actually doing very well economically. For example, Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, they're all seeing robust economic growth at the same time that Russia's economy has contracted by 4.6% in the last few months. So I think that on the one hand, you're seeing Russian economic decline. On the other hand, you are seeing some robust economic growth in Eastern and Central European countries, despite the economic situation in Moscow.
All right. We'll watch closely. Niall, good seeing you again.
Good to see you, Neil.